welcome everyone, and welcome back to those of you who have been joining us through this workshop series. Today's workshop is on supporting wellness through supervision. Before we get started, I just want to take a moment to ensure that everyone in the audience is ready and comfortable with the technical aspects of this webinar. As you'll see, closed captioning is enabled for today's webinar. We also have American Sign Language capabilities enabled. You can activate this by clicking the interpretation icon on your Zoom navigation bar. If you need tech support during the session, please send a chat to the hosts and we'll be able to address that for you as quickly as possible. If you have questions during the presentation, there is a Q&A area for you to enter those. Those questions will be sent directly to the presenters and moderators so we can get those in at the Q&A portion. Next slide, please. Our disclaimer: the views expressed in written conference materials or publications and by speakers and moderators do not necessarily reflect the official policies of the Department of Health and Human Services, SAMHSA, and nor does it mention of trade names, commercial practices, or organizations imply endorsement by the U.S. government. Next slide. SAMHSA has selected Altarum to provide training and technical assistance supports to states, territories, tribal organizations, and community partners across the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline and Crisis Continuum of Care. Along with our partners, W2 Consulting Corporation and Change Matrix LLC, both of whom have extensive experience with crisis services and technical assistance, the Crisis System Response Training and Technical Assistance Center, or the TTAC, was formed to support the continued growth of 988's Lifeline and build a more robust crisis care system. We'd like to thank our SAMHSA team for their support in putting together these workshop series. First, Jill Mays, the Division Director of Crisis System Transformation for the 988 and Behavioral Health Crisis Coordinating Office. And Captain Corey Palmer, the Workforce Lead for the Crisis System Transformation for the 988 and Behavioral Health Crisis Coordinating Office. Thank you both for all of your support. So for today's webinar, we'll go through our learning objectives. We'll have a guest presentation. As promised, we'll have that Q&A period for all of you to ask questions. And then we'll wrap up with some information about upcoming events. By the end of this workshop, participants will be able to describe how effective supervision enhances staff resilience and mitigates burnout in crisis service settings, explain the connection between supervisory support and staff retention, performance, and overall well-being, apply supervision strategies that foster reflective, supportive spaces where staff can process stress and emotions safely while maintaining accountability and promoting professional growth. And finally, integrate evidence-based wellness and resilience practices into supervision to promote sustained staff well-being. Next slide. Our presentation today is Supporting Wellness Through Supervision, an integrated performance-based approach. Next slide. Our first presenter is Brianna Green, the Director of Virginia Programs for HopeLink. She's been in the field for almost 10 years and has extensive experience at both the local and national levels. And Amelia Leto, the Director of National Programs with HopeLink, who has almost 20 years of experience and also working at the local and national levels. Welcome, both of you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us. So we wanted to start off with a disclaimer that this session is focusing on the supervisory practices related to one's job performance, workforce sustainability, that's important to so many of us out here in the trenches, if you will, and the operational effectiveness of the services that we provide. It is not to highlight clinical, therapeutic, or diagnostic guidance. So thank you for that. This is important to keep clear boundaries for our own consistency, the fairness, and our workforce sustainability. Thank you for joining us today. Next slide, and I'll hand it over to Bree.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thank you for the opportunity. So when we were initially presenting this at CrisisCon, which is kind of where this began, we felt it was important to pause and have a moment of intention with the fellow attendees. For those who have attended CrisisCon or any similar conferences, you're being saturated and inundated with a ton of information, and there's not a lot of time for pausing and intention. And just given the state of the field, all of the changes we've all been through, at least in the past year or two, um, just to sustain this meaningful work, we have to find the things that matter and the things that we can actually control, or else we're all going to be burning ourselves out very quickly. So we just wanted to take a pause, give people an opportunity to take a deep breath before we dive into more conversation about work. Next slide, please. Just to share a bit about where Amelia and I are coming from. So like Megan mentioned, we are both directors over at HopeLink Behavioral Health. It's a behavioral health organization that's kind of separated into two sides, if you will. We have the behavioral health side providing outpatient services and soon to be things like the clubhouse model to people local to Northern Virginia. And then we have the crisis services programs. We answer for both Virginia-based 988 regional community lines, as well as the national backup network for phones and chat and text. So very proud to be offering both that local and national support to people in crisis or with suicidal crisis. Of course, we're an integrated statewide crisis system leader. The Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services in Virginia has the state divided into 5 regions. HopeLink is currently contracted with 4 of the 5 regions to provide primary 988 support to people living in those communities. So we're very grateful to be so respected and trusted by our regional partners who we partner with just about every day. And one of the highlights of the work I do is with the Marcus Alert legislation, we are providing 911 diversion. So people who are calling Virginian 911 centers in behavioral health crisis or really any kind of crisis that doesn't require an imminent response because they are safe, they are not physically injured, and they're in a space to accept help, they can transfer that call to a 988 crisis worker. Of course, we'll explore options like mobile crisis or any other potential intervention that might be needed, but proud to say a lot of those are resolved at the call center. So just wanted to give a little background of what we do that will kind of help provide some context for where we came from with this approach. Next slide, please.
Thank you. So taking a look at not only our organization, we're asking that you take a look at your own. So taking that into account, we considered our supervision structure, how it was contributing, but also how it was mitigating problems and how we could strengthen those areas. Focusing on our staff's effectiveness, their impact on our community and those that we serve ultimately, and retention. We've taken that into consideration as well. We know that this work is intense by nature of it and took that into consideration with how we've moved forward. So looking at our workforce structure and environment, we are a predominantly remote and distributed workforce that lives across the country. When we initially started, we grew out of the grassroots in the local Northern Virginia area and we're in office. We moved from 40 in-person estimate to nearly 300 staff over the last several years, which has been tremendous and has also come with a lot of learning curves and a lot of opportunity to improve upon our practices. And we have found that the pros for our organization with our workforce being remote is it offers more flexibility with whom fills those seats and takes those contacts from our community. The reduced financial burden for some folks, it may be that the dollar goes farther in various places in the country, and as well as opened up our hiring opportunities and identifying qualified candidates that are of quality. But some of the cons that we have found, as many of us know over the last several years, has been it can reduce connection It can challenge communication, and it also provides less opportunity and less visibility to identify the strengths and the opportunities within one's performance, which is ultimately what our supervision model aims to do, to support and identify the strengths and the areas to better coach and support on as we move forward. We'll talk a bit more about that. And seeing supervision that needs to be intentional, it needs to be structured and not informal. With the intensity of this work and the emotional strain and saturation that our staff and our supervisory team was having, we saw the challenges it was presenting, the regular state of urgency, making sure that they're meeting their KPIs and all of those data points, but the underlying challenge that comes with this work, with the fatigue and the emotional burnout that can happen, and distract from the priorities of serving our persons in crisis. And the structure that had been in place shifted, right? We grew from those 40 to over 300, and we saw an opportunity to step back and find ways to develop our workforce even further and more directly. Um, we saw challenges with our supervisors that were performing more risk management and inserting themselves into situations that would have been better handled by coaching opportunities, by reflections, and more meaningful connections with our staff on the front lines. We also saw the opportunity for feedback and the lack thereof, that there wasn't meaningful conversations because our supervisors were challenged with how they were relaying and providing that information in the model that had been. So performance issues were going unaddressed. There was increased overcorrective action, and ultimately the supervisory and our staff were burning out. So this was also there was contributions to this by entry level supervisors. This field is quite small and unique at the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. It's quite niche in a lot of ways. And the technical and clinical expertise and knowledge was challenged. Um, Often we found ourselves growing within, which was a great strength in prior years, but it also led to peers supervising peers. Uh, the high risk remote environment was unfamiliar to many folks, and translating what had been in office to over Zoom, over Teams, over Google Meet was challenged. And there was inconsistency in the supervision, and roles were getting confused. There were not clear boundaries, expectations, and priorities being set and upheld regularly and consistently. So that clarity and that predictability were inconsistent, and it provided less growth opportunity and feedback loops. So engagement was dropping, and we saw it and we felt it and we took that in consideration. And we also saw the strength and the power that we had with growing our workforce. Looking at the issues prior, 988 was launched July 2022, and the workforce wasn't there to sustain it and how we had grown over the last several years, moving from grassroots, mission driven to an appealing remote environment was quite challenging, and people misunderstood the work. They didn't fully see the value and impact that they had. So we incorporated that into our applications and moving that forward with the impact. And I am going to say next slide as we talk more about the systemic challenges and get more into the concerns. So we took feedback into consideration, the seeing the systems gaps, seeing the challenges with the structure itself, taking those into how we moved forward and how we developed our strategic plan for rolling this out. Seeing the crisis workers were interacting with multiple trainers without much interaction with their supervisors, that they were moving from training onto the lines with little understanding of the full cycle and role consistency from trainer to supervisor and the differences there. And also that lack of continuity with the relationships that we want to build and foster within our reflective supervisory practices. And that they were not consistently scheduled on the same shift. Procedural concerns, there were performative concerns, and ultimately we saw the lack of documentation and need to course correct and provide that consistently with our folks. And we also had supervisors that had grown with us, and we still have supervisors and staff that have grown with us over the last several years, which has been really exciting, right? That small grassroots community-based organization that we also love and have grown within ourselves, and saw the connections and challenges that had been taking place. So we are moving from this model of emotion-based to more observable, actionable feedback models and proper reflective supervision that incorporates the full picture and how it can benefit the performance and deepen the relationship and the working relationship between our staff and our supervisors. So we're looking to bridge the gap forward to provide more structure, more frequency and regularity, and a shared purpose and mission, tying that back into where we are at now from where we had been and how we have redesigned this moving forward. Next slide, and I'll hand it off to Brie. Thank you.
So what supervision looked like before. It wasn't always scheduled on the same shift as the employee. Shift supervisors were really prioritizing their time and convenience over what worked best for the crisis worker. Procedural, performative, and operationally misaligned. There was just a lot of confusion still because of the immense growth that our organization had with the implementation of 988. Like Amelia mentioned, we went from a staff of 40, primarily in person, and then through COVID, after COVID, we grew to a staff that's a completely virtual remote staff of almost 300 people. So you can imagine that the operations, the policies, and the processes look a little different when you go up that much on scale. It was very standardized and documentation focused. Our supervisors tend to see it very black and white. So they want a clear policy, they want very clear directions, and seem to struggle with impromptu coaching that has to happen, that comes up in supervision, that you can't always prepare and you don't always know what the conversation is going to look like. It was just about 1 hour every 2 weeks for our full-time staff, and the supervisor to employee structure in those meetings was 1-to-1. So as you can imagine, with the immense growth in resources and staff, that the 1-to-1 was also getting more and more difficult to do consistently. So we kind of highlighted the gaps in the current system, not individual failures. And this provided us an opportunity to revisit our structure and to strengthen it. Amelia also mentioned earlier the kind of disjointedness that comes with the life cycle of crisis workers in this previous model. They spent 3 to 4, if not longer, working with the training team and trainers. Once training was completed, then they moved on to working with a supervisor, so that the supervisor wasn't involved in their development in that period, which is a pretty important period in the crisis worker life cycle. They hadn't had any vulnerable moments together because they hadn't handled any interactions together. They hadn't debriefed together, and they haven't even had a chance to get to know each other on a personal level, which is important, especially in this work that we still see the human of each other. So those are some of the gaps that we identified that we wanted to fill to make it a more positive experience for our staff, especially our crisis workers who are doing the difficult, heavy work of talking to people in crisis every day. So we wanted to enhance emotional awareness, and that would lead to better data interpretation and coaching engagement, but not necessarily there to provide therapy, which is key, and we'll get into a little bit later too. Strengthening the supervisory relationship, so there needs to be increased trust. Like I said, especially in this work, because there's so much vulnerability in what we do. And then, of course, supporting the workers' emotional regulation. Again, that's not necessarily through therapeutic techniques or even debriefing, but tying performance behaviors back to performance, creating expectations that are clear and consistent so no one has to wonder what's expected of them. We can go to the next slide, please. So it was really important for us to look at what we are working with currently, what we had at our disposal currently. And what we had was a lot of data, a lot of information from a lot of different places. Not everyone knows how to use it, what to pay the closest attention to in those data points, or how to move the needle in our favor. I think a lot of them would look at the overall kind of KPIs and feel really overwhelmed and feel really helpless because those are big numbers and they're just one person. I'll get a little more into our volume here. Just as an example, we as a center on 988 Virginia have been experiencing unprecedented volume. So the resources that we had did not match the volume of calls that we were receiving, meaning our answer rates didn't look great. That is pretty terrifying to a staff member who knows that their performance impacts that and knows that their livelihood is on the line if they're a poor performer. So they look at an overall answer rate as an individual failure, and that's not what we're asking them to do or how we want them to see it. So we realized that we had to really explain how to use the data, what they should be paying attention to, and what they could impact. So a lot of staff also struggle with the data piece. And I remember as we transitioned into being more data informed as crisis lines in general, even before 988, a lot of the questions from our volunteers or even our frontline staff was, well, so are numbers more important than people? And as a leader, it can be a challenge to explain the nuance or the gray that is numbers are not more important than people, and numbers are how we sustain our organization and make sure that we're still here and people in crisis have the resources to reach out to, which is us. We want to keep doing this work. We want to be competitive, and we want people to say, Virginia is the best, let's do it like them. So yeah, it's a combination of providing the best possible care to people when there are positive things that impact the organization when you provide that amazing care to people and do it strategically. So again, those challenges as a leader, I think it was lessons for us as leaders, and those are the things that need to be communicated to staff and coach them through. Next slide, please. So then we were looking at, okay, what are some of the gaps, some of the things that we'd like to see change with the new supervision model, with a new approach. We were having persistent attendance and scheduled adherence challenges. Again, it seems to come with having a remote workforce. Some people have the impression that because you're working remotely, you can work from anywhere and you can do your laundry and hang out with your kids and be ready for a crisis call at the same time. And that's not the case. So people come in and they quickly learn they can't do both, and they had conflicting engagements, and that's led to some attendance and scheduled adherence challenges. But we also had some anxiety-driven attendance issues because there was kind of a lack of clarity and expectation what their role is in the organization as a whole and as an individual. A lot of people just didn't want to show up, and when they were working with their supervisor, only once every 2 weeks, there wasn't a lot of support or connection there. So the work becomes even more scary. You have to have a supportive environment where you feel connected to do this work and be successful in this work. Like I said before, limited understanding of the performance data and the individual impact on outcomes. So what exactly can you look at from the plethora of data that we have available that shows your performance and how it's impacting the overall KPI data? And then a greater reliance on corrective action rather than performance-based coaching. We found that our supervisory staff were getting really focused on people's behaviors and not tying the behaviors back to performance to provide coaching to improve their workflow or the quality of their work. So that, again, that kind of led to some of the attendance issues too. When the only time you're meeting with your supervisor, it's punitive or corrective, that doesn't feel good, that doesn't feel safe. And then you don't know what to expect the next time, or you don't even know if you're doing a good job for the week or two in between your meeting with your supervisor again. So we really wanted to target that, and we wanted to focus back from people as individuals and their behaviors, which can feel kind of yucky, and back to the work. We're an organization, we have a mission, let's connect everything back to that mission. And how do we know we're fulfilling our mission? By looking at the data and analyzing that. So again, they were really getting, I think this speaks to the safety piece as well. In addition to corrective action, a lot of people were just getting emotional support or commiserating on how difficult things are from their supervisor. So they weren't getting leadership, they weren't getting a reframe, they weren't getting a validation of, hey, I hear you, and let's work together to figure out how we can make this a better experience for you. It was like kind of hands up, this is the best I can do. The leaders above me said so, and that didn't create a good feeling for anyone involved. Next slide. Still me. So what we realized we had to do was define what supervision actually means in this work, because what was happening wasn't what producing the outcomes we want to see, and it really wasn't what we expect in supervision. A part of that required a difficult shift in mindset for all of us who have been in the crisis line field for a long time. An example is I come from a local organization in Michigan. That's where I got my start with Miss Amelia here. And it was volunteer based. We had some paid staff, but it was primarily volunteers. They were donating their time. We had blankets in the room. We debriefed in a comfy room with a cozy couch every 4 hours, and you connected with people regularly throughout your shift. It was so connection based, and that worked. That worked for the scale that we were at, the model we had, and the missions that we were pursuing. We realized that compassion in supervision looks a little different at this scale. So yes, it feels good to de-escalate the person that reports to you that's having a hard day. But one way that you can do that outside of using your crisis intervention skills on your direct report, which, hey, works sometimes, but shouldn't be a regular practice, is to show compassion by showing consistency and helping people know what they can expect. These are my expectations of you up front. This is what we're going to go through every meeting. Constructive feedback does not mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean you're a right fit. It means that this is a practice, and we are all continuing to learn and grow as we practice and do this work. Humans working with humans, I always say, is imperfect. You cannot expect to have a perfect conversation with someone in crisis. So there's no true guidance, direction, or expectation when you're just emotionally commiserating and providing emotional support to someone. That creates a lack of safety for people who are working in incredibly heavy and complicated situations. On top of that, this is their livelihood. So there has to be solid ground for them to stand on in this work with their colleagues, with their supervisor. So redefining compassion. Compassion's clarity, compassion's commitment to growth, and commitment to seeking alignment versus punishment when change is needed in performance. So approaching with curiosity always, and a solution-focused approach. Again, connecting individual performance to the larger goal includes providing context for the bigger picture. What's at stake as an organization, as a service? Why are we moving in this direction? What's driving the organization's strategic direction? What is out of our control as an organization due to other systemic things that are happening? So they really appreciate the why and the context. It's just being intentional about how much you're providing so they don't hold that and own that, but are aware as to why things are happening the way they are and reinstating what they need to focus on as a part of that. This forms, again, understanding and buy-in. Again, while reiterating that their job is to focus on the day-to-day and their individual performance, our job is to really look at the bigger picture. Supporting our shift in culture with accessible policy was also important. I was recently working with a group of behavioral health responders, crisis people for a convening in Utah. A few different states came, and we decided that there needs to be a bumper sticker for social work, behavioral health policy that just says, it depends, because it is so difficult to write black and white policy when you're working with a complicated human in crisis. Situations can happen and deviate in different ways, in ways you couldn't expect. But our staff was hungry for policies that were just a flow chart of what to do, what to say, and when. So again, that in coaching, we really had to describe where the nuances, where the complexity is, but then create policies that could provide more clarity. So again, finding that middle where both people are feeling like they understand what's happening and what's expected of them. Next slide, Miss Amelia.
Thank you. So we had to come up with a plan, right? We had to visit not only the policy, but the training and the overall structure. We are aiming to be collaborative, to be employee focused, to not provide therapy, not debriefing in our supervisions, but collaborating and having a conversation, developing further. It also required our need to create new roles, reimagine what this looks like at this scale, where we're at now and what lessons we have learned, and the adjustment in responsibilities for existing roles. I saw in the Q&A we did have a question that I'm about to address. So it is twofold with our how we define supervisors in this conversation. So we have overall we have people managers, and often the default has been supervisors. And then with this, we have primarily focused on our shift supervisors who are salaried and have been supporting and providing that supervision to our crisis workers, in addition to our lead supervisors. So moving away from that shift supervisory to crisis worker model was an important one. And we saw that value, the buy-in of the training with the people managing and those additional personnel skills to take into consideration with performance and a more sustainable uh, workforce. And to retain our folks. We know we invest, we know we have grown, and we know we are continuing to grow and expand as we move forward. So we took a step back from that, right? We looked at our shift supervisors, the core need of that role and what a new role that would replace that looks like. And we determined to shift leads, focusing on the overall operations, the supervisory consultations, interventions that may need to be that need to take place. We've built out our workforce uh, management team in addition to that real-time support, that in the moment guidance, in addition to the clinical team that we consult with and work with in our day-to-day work on the lines. The shift leads are primarily a functional role. They are moving from people management to shift operations solely so they can focus and provide opportunity to build up those skills. They are responsible for the shift work and the day-to-day movement of attendance, call outs, in the moment situations that happen on the lines, whether that be our phones, chat, or text service, and removing that ongoing performance management and those long-term important development conversations that people have been asking for further investment, for more buy-in and understanding of what they're looking for coming into this work. We have a diverse group of individuals with various talents from various fields that are looking to grow and develop themselves professionally and oftentimes grow within or move on to some other applicable field, right? And then our lead supervisory team, we have taken that coaching model and implemented that with the coach position. So following a crisis worker from recruitment, hiring onto the lines, and whether they depart or whether they grow within our organization. We wanted to provide that opportunity for the life cycle of our crisis worker staff in particular, and see that as starting at training and continuing on. So that continuity, that relationship stability, that buy-in, that understanding of performance, of seeing that growth and that trajectory. I think many of us have seen that opportunity as we've grown up in this work and the experience that we come into. And then looking at our supervision through that reflective supervision lens, expanding what our supervisors do, building up their capacity, their understanding, their skill sets to be able to better manage the emotional reactivity that can come up in this work. That this work is often co-regulation and identifying here's what is in our control in the moment, and here's what's out without, and having those difficult conversations of staying in tune with what's happening and balancing that accountability with meaningful support. So identifying those challenges of an example right on the lines of you shared a resource that is no longer applicable. Here's some feedback about how you can identify a resource differently in the future, and having that opportunity to step back and see the opportunity within the skill sets of the crisis worker. So building that psychological safety by having real vulnerable conversations that are focused, and having that ability to provide more timely, honest, actionable conversations, and building up that challenge that comes with, do I trust this person or not, right? That defensiveness and the challenges that come with the different approaches that crisis work can have. Reminding them, here is the focus, here is the center, here is where we stand, and here's how you can build within that, within our policies, procedures, and your capacity as well. So moving forward, looking at it, kind of separating the operations from the performance development and providing that consistency, building up that trust, building up more sustainable supervision models, and the structure that comes with it. So with our next slide, we took a look at that. We took a look at our building blocks, right? That foundation and how we can build that out and build it out for a more meaningful practice. Our quality assurance team has grown over the last couple of years, and it is filled with amazing people. I want to speak very highly of our quality assurance team and the skills that they are bringing with their the data that they're coming forward with, how they're applying it, with the skills that they're noticing with the interaction reviews, how they're coaching up, how they're calibrating, and how they're building up feedback models and feedback loops that are more consistent, more direct, and applicable to where our workforce is at and how we are building up that trust and continuity and the life cycle of the crisis worker, and providing that opportunity to provide the coaching with that understanding as well. And with that, the coaches are taking those one-on-one meetings once a month for our part-time staff, twice a month for our full-time staff, focusing on performance, measurable, actionable results, and regularly reviewing their meeting notes, ensuring that they're on the same page, and providing follow-up when necessary. And using the performance-based metrics and data that their crisis workers are putting out. What is their adherence rate? How does that impact their performance? What is happening with their, at times, connectivity? What is their cadence for attendance? Are there any concerns there? Are they taking PTO? We have a great amount of resources and wealth of benefits. Are they capitalizing and utilizing those? In service, we have maintained our process groups run by our clinical team. It's a time to provide debriefing, skill-based coaching and development, as well as topical conversations that are happening, whether it's on the national front or internally with where we're at in the organization. They may address work-related concerns and challenges, but they also provide feedback to our coaching team. And it's facilitated independently of the direct performance evaluation. So they identify common themes or concerns, areas that we can coach on and train up across the board, but also individually if and when necessary. And then the coaching groups are more skill-based, providing more education opportunity and understanding of what our KPIs are, how they work, why they're important, and how they impact performance, as well as the operational skills, procedural skills, reviewing, dusting them off, providing on-the-job training that gives better insight and understanding of the day-to-day outside of the silent monitoring and regularly, the monthly reviews for quality, and those are provided once a month as well. And I think that is on to the next slide.
So another piece, of course, we wanted to incorporate, like if I've mentioned so much, is data. So we have a lot of it, and yes, initially it was overwhelming for our staff, but as a part of this transition into the newer model, we wanted to pull some more specifics that we could be using regularly with coaching and supervision. So these were what we pulled that we thought would make the most sense to people and tell the story. Call answer rate's still important because it tells that big picture, but again, each individual isn't necessarily responsible for an answer rate, but it's important as we talk through the more specific data points to see how it informs that overall percentage. Shift adherence. So how much time on shift are you actually taking calls or documenting calls or doing something that's related to call taking activity? And how much are you needing to take a breather? Or ask for a debrief. Just looking at how time is being used on shift to make sure it's not only benefiting the organization, but to make sure the person is doing okay and performing in a way that's sustainable so we can keep them around. Average handle time. It's something we look at, and not just performance for the crisis worker, but as many of us know, a longer call doesn't always mean a more successful call. So if we notice that someone is having longer handle times across the board, that's something we want to look at. Are they understanding the purpose of the conversation? Are they meeting all of the conversation stages that we expect them to, in a way that we expect them to? Are these egregious calls that they're just happen to be getting back to back that do require the more time? So it's a tool to look at how they're doing, and what we need to consider when we look at this performance data point. The time of day is huge. In Virginia, we're a bit of an outlier currently in terms of crisis lines because most of our volume is coming in Monday through Friday between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. Typically, we expect more higher volume in the evenings, especially on the weekends. Everyone knows the Sunday scaries have always come up on the crisis lines. I remember some of those overnight shifts, and it was really intense. So ensuring that we're considering the overall volume during that time of day when we're tying back to performance. Is this the answer rate we would expect given the volume that's come in during that time of day? If not, let's look at shift adherence. So you can see how they all kind of tie together to help tell the full story of what took place that day. And then, of course, past performance. Are we seeing improvement in their quality reviews? Are they gaining skills as we would expect them to as they continue to practice crisis intervention? Has their average handle time deviated? Are they taking really short calls when they used to take longer calls? Okay, that means there was an overcorrection, and we need to go back to coaching, maybe do some role plays to see what it is, what the gap is, what they're missing. That's kind of bringing this into a cohesive crisis intervention call with a normal average handle time. So some questions that we could ask as a part of this is, what happened in those calls that felt challenging to you? What emotional patterns were emerging for the person you were talking to, but also for yourself? Were you noticing anything happening in your body during that time? Let's go back to your self-care plan and see how we can incorporate that to help your performance on the calls. Are you feeling stuck at any point in the conversation, and where? And let's unpack that. A lot of people feel stuck with exploring the story because we have this false sense of urgency to fix. Most people, ideally, who come into this field because they want to help and they want to make it better. And as, again, like Amelia would say, sitting in the suck doesn't always feel like you're making an impact, but boy, is it something that most people aren't getting on a regular basis, is someone to just sit with them and let them feel the way they feel. So having those conversations, perspective shifting, looking at people in crisis, their behaviors, and how to positively impact them in a way that you wouldn't expect in everyday life, because there are some things that we do every day that really don't align with helping someone de-escalate. So obviously, all of this would result in better insight on their end. We're in a system now where they have access to their own data on a regular basis, so they can always check to see how they're doing, and create that initiative, so that it's not always someone coming behind them, which doesn't feel good after a while. So we love that better insight, higher buy-in, obviously, seeing that their individual performance can impact us. It's a great way to, like I said, to tie it all together and to tell the story. And then more stable improvement, understanding that constructive feedback is going to be something that happens regularly. It's not a bad thing. We can all learn and grow together to learn how to support people better and differently, given that they're so unique as well. So data and impact. Next slide, please. Sorry. So when you're looking at this from your lens, I again kind of focus on what you have and what you can control. So what can be automated was a huge thing for us, technologically. Like, we have so much technology at our disposal. We're not all the biggest experts in the technology because we're crisis intervention experts. So investing in people, resources that can help improve that and teach us, so that we are releasing some of the burden from staff for any further manual documentation, anything work like that, so that they can focus on the caller as much as possible, but also ensuring that we have that documentation because it's so important, and the data, again, is also very important. So it's looking at what you have in the data and how do you use it. Can you leverage the data to show its impact? To show relationships between what needs to happen and how that individual behavior contributes to it as a whole? How can you provide the data to people who need it? Obviously, hopefully in an augmented way, because again, resources are limited. So there's not necessarily a data analyst in every crisis center. So automating those processes become really important. So essentially, if you're collecting it, how do you make meaning of it to those who are impacting it? And you'll see some of the other things that we considered, as stated in the slide. Contacts longer than 20 minutes. I said before, like, that's something we usually want to look at, especially if there's a pattern. Police interventions. So are we using police interventions appropriately? Are we determining when we need a police intervention appropriately in the conversation? Or are we staying on that call a little too long before we get to that step? But also, calls that involve police interventions typically are also more intense, higher acuity, and are just longer. So noting that when we're looking through the data. Current suicidal ideation, obviously safety planning is an important component of those conversations. That can mean the conversation is going to look a little bit longer, or it's going to be a little more complex and intense. So someone's performance may look different if they're having a lot of those calls. Follow-ups. We use shared staff for both our inbound and our follow-up program, our follow-up calls. For those who aren't familiar, it's required that we offer a suicide support safety follow-up to anyone who has indicated on a call that they've experienced suicidal ideation within the past 24 hours. So there's a lot of follow-up calls, as you can imagine, and that does impact what we're seeing on our inbound lines if we're having to prioritize making those follow-up calls. And then in Virginia, we have a lot of mobile crisis referrals. That does require really that the documentation is as accurate and digestible as possible, so that the providers who are going out in the scenes to support those people can do so in the way that's safe for everyone. Next slide, please.
So with that, we're going to pause here. We're going to ask you to reflect on your organizations before we move on to sharing some of our outcomes. So this is about how you may apply it, not finding the right answer, um, but how this may work with your service and who you're supporting. So with those first three bullet points, we are going to incorporate the chat feature, which looks like many of you are familiar with your introductions, compliments, and inquiries. We also have the Q&A, so you're welcome to drop your questions in there, but this will be an action for you to take, this interactive piece. So we are going to prompt you to drop your reflections into the chat. And the last one, we are going to use a Mentimeter, a word cloud, which is very exciting. I believe many may be familiar with this, but I'll walk you through that as well. And that'll be with that last bullet point. So reflective supervision supports supervisors' ability to implement the performance model, right? We want them to implement it effectively, compassionately, with sustainability in mind for our staff, for our growth, for the services that we provide. And it's not a prescriptive how-to. It's this presentation was really built around and having in mind that each of our organizations are often fairly unique, with various goals, staffing composition, structure, the access to data that you may or may not have, and some of the policy constraints, and limitations that you may have. So it's not replication, but how to adapt this into your own services. So with that, I believe we will be dropping the questions in the chat as well. The first one, as you may read from the screen, is as the model gets ready to roll out, envisioning that you're at that point, how are you preparing your supervisors to deliver that personalized feedback effectively, if not already? And I imagine many of you have components of this incorporated or have seen some of the strengths and opportunities that you have within your own organizations. Yes, and everyone is a good point, Stephanie. Thank you. So there is, within the Zoom chat feature, you can hit the blue tile, I suppose, at the bottom, and it says hosts and panelists, and then the next one down is for everyone. So, and then we'll talk through that with some folks who are
Brave folks.
answering in the chat. Yes. All right. So with that, again, as the model gets ready to roll out, seeing if you're at that point, or maybe you already doing some of this, how are you preparing your supervisors for personalized feedback and how to do so effectively?
I can kick it off and say,
Thank you.
I'll just, like
Yeah.
maybe just spark some ideas in people. They need to know what they're getting feedback on, meaning they needed access to our quality review and scoring guide, which, believe it or not, was a gap. So we have our quality assurance managers who do the quality reviews, and they were submitting feedback to the shift supervisors, but the shift supervisors didn't have a lot of context for where it came from or what the expectations were when we were submitting those reviews of those conversations. So information, making sure people have the information that they're expected to know in order to give feedback.
Mm-hmm. And with some of that is how to deliver the information.
Yes.
Right? The discomfort that comes with that delivery of, this may be difficult to hear, but I want to take the opportunity to provide you some insight into what we're seeing, some themes, some concerns, and here's some options and ways that you may approach this differently next time. So Lydia contributed the positioning of the feedback, right? As it's developmental, it's not punitive, but it's meant to be a step in the right direction, how you can develop those skills further. And setting that as an expectation, right? As your supervisor, as your coach, I want to provide this opportunity, and this is the expectation that you can have of me and from me for you, and how we will have these conversations. Molly Hill, reformatting supervisions to prioritize space for receiving feedback, right? Scheduling the timeout, giving advance notice, incorporating it into your workforce management tools, and having those opportunities to reflect on individuals' learning styles, and how they receive feedback. That's absolutely an important piece, is it important for you to have a conversation, or can I provide these bullet points, these talking notes to you ahead of time so you can discuss this further, and come prepared to the conversation, and having it be more collaborative. Absolutely. I believe it's Surge 11, modeling the experience in your own supervision with your supervisors, right? We want to, from that top down, bottom up, how can we better prepare ourselves? How can we hold ourselves accountable, and in a more consistent um, a more consistent way with the change management that comes with any kind of updates or structural model implementations. Kristen shared supervision sessions are utilized for teaching moments to work on goals that our call takers have set for themselves. That's great. So that identifying those key goals, areas to work on, areas to see themselves obtaining as their skills grow. Among other things, Kristen's center, she shared, however, allowing the call taker to feel they are driving some of the supervision has been successful. Absolutely. We want to feel incorporated. We want to feel a part of it. We want to feel like we are gaining information from that. Spencer added that they have found when building a trust forward supervisory space, staff are not only willing to be more vulnerable, but accept feedback in a way that feels less punitive, right? It is the trust but verifying, but also I'm investing. This is a working relationship. I'm investing this into you and providing this opportunity to build up the skills and break down some of the barriers, and some of the challenges that come with not knowing, fearing what you don't know, and not knowing how to ask the right questions. I also see Adriana added coaching supervisors to conduct pre-briefs with the new crisis counselors to go over expectations, share their supervision style, which Bree had noted, and creating mutual agreements, right? Like, how can we both show up in this space? Maybe that's off the top. What would help you feel safe in this supervision and have it framed in that way? Absolutely. Brianna shared the back end while having already prepared an agenda. It's important to discuss, and maintaining boundaries. What are your boundaries? What's the expectations there? And always using the Network Resource Center, the it is grown exponentially in the last couple of years. It's really incredible what Shai and the team over at Vibrant and 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline have provided. The clinical support guide, for supervisors, I believe I saw Finley in here, and Laura about the wellness and the coaching that can come from that, the debriefing. Absolutely. Exciting news with content expanding for the supervision, supports and information available there as well. Absolutely. So we want to move right or forward progress within our organizations, taking the learning opportunities, and still meeting the needs of our organizations. Angela added starting the conversation with positive feedback, allowing staff to have space to acknowledge the areas that they feel they need to improve on, and then sharing your perspective on areas of improvement. So it's collaborative, right? Giving them the space. What are your key talking points? What are your key concerns that you're seeing, feeling, hearing, experiencing, and how do they align with what I'm seeing, hearing, experiencing as your coach, as your direct supervisor? And I think it's also the barriers, and breaking those down, modeling them as one noted, and identifying here are some areas that we can work on as the leadership team and how we can roll this out more impactfully and using the tools that we have. So this next question, and I invite you to contribute in the chat as well, is also what systems or tools will be in place to ensure data becomes a supportive coaching resource rather than a punitive measure? So what might you have that you can already use to your advantage and repurpose, whether that's the the dashboards that we use, the various platforms that we use, announcements, highlights, screen grabs, content, how you relay information. Yeah, Bree.
I was gonna say, I like thinking about the phone system transition we had recently, and how
Great
now
job.
our counts,
You
thank you.
did it.
Now how our crisis workers have access to their own data in real time. In the previous
Yeah.
system, they didn't have access to the data reporting. So I
Mhm.
think that transparency is really important. So that the worker can be accountable to themselves in addition to the supervisor bringing it to those coaching sessions.
Absolutely. Yeah, the visibility is so valuable and really seeing the impact. Um, Thinking back to, when we were in the brick and mortar at our old center way back when, um, we saw some initiatives that went out. We would do yearly reflections. How many calls did you take? How many calls were safely de-escalated and a safety plan was established? How many opportunities were made with connections on the follow-up contacts that you made? And seeing those numbers for folks and seeing the impact that they had was so incredibly valuable. It can be challenging, as we know, of taking back-to-back contacts or, ensuring the documentation and the phone and the next and the next and the next. But really seeing and taking a step back is where the opportunity lies, with how folks incorporate their own performance, how they envision their own performance and utilizing that. So with that, again, like what systems or tools do you have in place in your organizations? What do you currently use um, to inform your supervisions? It looks like we have quite a few. Sir Jess, a great question. Are we using any transcripts of calls in the call
Yes.
review process? Absolutely. We also incorporate the good old listening. It's been it's not eye-opening, but it's always refreshing to see the perspectives and the different perspectives of what people pick up. Our quality assurance management team, they've gone through a number of calibrations or, weighing in on different contacts and what they pick up, the differences, and seeing the whole picture is invaluable to have those conversations and identifying that. And Tiffany shared that every year we give staff a certificate celebrating the amount of interactions they've taken since they first started. They always look forward to seeing the number grow over the years. The progress that we make each year is incredible. The
Yeah.
growth of this network has been something I couldn't ever have imagined when I first learned that this was a potential career or a volunteer opportunity as I came into the field. Um, but really seeing the performance growth with the experience that one has in the field is amazing. Click we're good there. So another system and tool that we've used is, our HRIS system with our performance appraisal uh, uh, to be more objective, actionable, and deliberate with the feedback that is provided with various areas to identify with the skills and performance of our staff, and it is specific to each individual role. And redesigning the supervision form and how that incorporates, and we pull that into the conversations as well. That helps supervisors navigate the conversations, and then expanding on what supervision really looks like with that coach within that coaching model, the one-on-ones, the process groups, the debriefings that we can offer, and having those tools be better understood, navigated, managed, and accessible to our supervisory coaching team. Does anybody have anything else to add to the systems of tools that they have in place? Feeling good there. All right, let's move to what's training structures are built in to strengthen the role of sustainability and empowerment. So, what training structures do you have in place to support your teams with their sustainability, with empowering them to feel informed, feel knowledgeable, feel seen, supported, and heard? And some of it is the workforce differences that we each have in our organizations. I believe we have some folks that are fully in person at those brick and mortar shops. We have folks that are hybrid. We also have folks that are remote, and how those have challenged, but also provided opportunity for how we deliver training. Many centers, and including 988 as a whole with the Network Resource Center, have built out whole training sites for that asynchronous learning and developing those various modules.
I love that.
Was that a reaction to Aaliyah's
Yes.
response?
Yes.
So Aaliyah shared, we have a staff mentor who's assigned new staff for the first 3 months of their employment. They review the majority of their taken interactions, documentation, provide daily feedback. That's amazing to see that investment from that start. Those first 90 days that we often know are so critical to this work, to finding your rhythm and your understanding and applying those skills and education that you learned onto the lines. That's incredible. And to see the progress and then hand off. Tempest also adds their center hosts regular training opportunities for all staff, as well as role specific open forums to discuss concerns on shift. That's great. So utilizing the tools and resources available to have those open conversations and dialogues, finding opportunity to provide that, to find deeper connection with one another, to have those conversations, to see the different perspectives and approaches that people may take, and expose them to the ongoing learnings, our annual compliance trainings, and just the skill building is so important, right? It's not so much the use it, you lose it. It's often the we have to dust this one off. I haven't had a call around human trafficking, for example, in a minute. What could I do differently here? And that's also something that we've incorporated into the phone system that Bree mentioned, is some areas to improve and build out there so they can have accessible resources that are applicable to the conversations in real time. So I think another piece that I wanted to add here was, with our training structure, we do live facilitation, we do asynchronous work, and then we do a combination of the two as folks come in and throughout their life cycle here, and utilizing those tools to our advantage, whether that be asynchronously or having those live conversations facilitated afterwards, but being able to take practicing what we preach, how we can apply these skills into the ongoing day-to-day work, and really strengthen their understanding, their own emotional regulation and co-regulation, and meeting people where they're at, while being most collaborative, least invasive. I think that is one of the strongest pieces of information that I've really taken from this work, is to navigate the conversations. So it's not this way, it's this. And that can really challenge the nervous system, the decision making, providing the tools and resources and information to collaborate with our team to provide them with the information that they need most regularly, and seeing the coaching model apply this as well for their own well-being. It's contributing to greater resilience, to the greater team cohesion and understanding, and a stronger performance as we build out stronger training structures, as we revisit and build those out even further. Does anybody have anything else to add about their training program and how you could apply some of this into the training programs or structures? All right, well, we're going to move on to our last one. This is the Mentimeter for us. So you can use the QR code. I believe you can also go to, I believe the link will be shared here shortly, or go to menti.com. It's MENTI.com. And you will enter the code 2335-5719. And the prompt is, what one word that best describes the biggest challenge? What one word best describes the biggest challenges that you anticipate that this model moves into? And as it fills, we'll see it develop. And you can add as many words as you would like. So, time, there is never enough.
That was the first thing that came to my mind. That's awesome.
It is the time investment, the buy-in, the conversations, the planfulness, the planning, the strategy and approach, the time, consistency. Absolutely. That was one of the biggest impetus, was the consistency in seeing the lack thereof amongst too many of our staff and our supervisors, and seeing that that change is hard. Absolutely. Pushback, uncertainty, data interpretation, making sure that we have the tools and information to provide that to them, the ambiguity that comes with it, having to adjust, the scheduling, resistance, preparation, supervision from the top.
Reactivity. That's a big one. As leaders,
yeah,
that we can see a lot of that.
Absolutely. The data to inform.
So we're all in the same boat, is what I'm reading. That's always validating and reassuring.
The anxiety, willingness to be open.
Seeing a lot of just themes around change in general.
Change management is an absolutely challenging and important piece of this. And having yeah, go ahead. No, thank you.
I was going to say, I think part of what we've had to conclude in some of our messaging around change is that we know it's uncomfortable, and we are asking you to sit with some of that uncomfortability and give it a chance to see the positive impacts that come once we actually make a change and give it a shot, and knowing that we're still always open to their feedback. It may not produce results, but we are happy to listen. Sometimes that's the best we can do.
Absolutely.
I love this.
So the important piece is really test driving the process and finding what works best for you, for your organization, for your needs, and where you're seeing the barriers, the friction, and how you can address them. And it's not a failure, but a learning opportunity to build out and revisit some of the components that you may have incorporated into your plan.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, we want to acknowledge the fears and the uncertainty that comes with it, that we saw, the challenges that many of us are sharing across the board. As we bring up the next slide, we're going to take a look at some of our outcomes and move into our open Q&A. Thank you so much for participating. All right, so some of those quality outcomes. I just put a note on here to define what our quality practices and approach have been. We want those clear, observable behaviors, the role-related, specific, performance-based feedback, standards, practices that align with our policies and procedures that are also informed by the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifelines operational standards and practices. So we base much of our work and our approach has been informed by the safety assessment model and how we train down our folks, identifying the quality improvement measures, ensuring quality assurance is regularly incorporated into one's approach when providing that consistent language. Supervisors know what to look for. What does good look like, and how does it look for one individual, and how it can differ in presentation, but in reflection, it's not about subjectivity, it's about objectivity, ensuring consistent regular feedback, and clear roles across the team and what those quality expectations are. So standardizing the language within the one-on-one coaching supervision forms with those performance discussions, identifying kind of the framework around the shifts, the coaching, the team's communications. And it's not about a checklist, but an overall understanding of ensuring that we're doing the best possible job that we can for those that we serve. It is not a end all be all. However, here are the expectations that I have of you. Here's what I expect and need from you to ensure that we're doing our best every day, because somebody is having the worst moment of their life when they're calling us. And that's often the bottom line when it comes back to it, is ensuring that those that we're serving are being served with quality care and support, and embedding those into our daily conversations. Thank you. So those clear, consistent feedback, the actionable guidance, sustainable, reinforced workforce to ensure that we're kind of bridging the gap, that it's observable, reinforceable, and they have an understanding that it strengthens the safety, their effectiveness, and our service continuity and consistency. So we're going to take a look next with Bree over workforce development.
Next slide, please. So these are a lot of the things we've already touched on, I think, in the conversation and some of the previous slides, but just to reiterate the outcomes that we've seen around our workforce. So we talked about the rapport that's built with the coach because they are with them, following them from their time as a trainee into their time as a solo crisis worker and their time as a tenured crisis worker as well. Of course, whenever possible, maintaining that consistency. With the group kind of coaching model, there's more camaraderie that's created and motivation is created, knowing we can positively impact programs, individuals, and as small groups. We're looking at those coaching groups together when we're reviewing their performance on a one-on-one basis as well. Mistakes become normalized and understood as a part of the learning and growing process for both our supervisors or coaches and the crisis workers or frontline staff. And again, the coach is a trusted partner in their development. So there's someone with them who's kind of on their side, can advocate if needed, based on their needs and based on the needs of the organization. And of course, that clarity and transparency and what is going to be expected of them is crucial to the psychological safety of our staff. Next slide. Of course, operational expectations or outcomes. So when we're addressing performance, that's expected rather than being viewed as disciplinary. Employees have an understanding of the key performance indicators and what's changeable, what they can do to impact some of that. Greater accountability between workers and direct supervisors, which I think also comes with that kind of data transparency for the worker as well as the supervisor, staff, and above. And again, less corrective action that's focusing on behavior correction, more emphasis on policy and performance concerns. So the staff who are desperate for those clear lines and for that black and white approach do have some of that in this. So reflective supervision is the mechanism by which a cultural change sticks. There's trust, which results in honest conversations. There's emotional support provided when necessary that provides resilience and retention. And there's meaning making. What you're doing is making a difference. What the work you do every day does fulfill the mission of 980 in the organization. And that helps people stay here, sustain the work, but not only stay, but grow in their performance.